recommended reading lists that you would think that people should get. Yes, there is. There really are, for years, very few good books written about hypnosis. Most books are rewrites of something else somebody else wrote about hypnosis. But with all the writers out there now compared to years ago, there are more and more good books coming online about hypnosis. But because hypnosis is not very complicated, you read a lot of the same things over and over again, but you just have a different title on the book to sell it, or a fancier picture on the book. So let's start off. When I was a young man, there was no really books written about hypnosis that was available to the non-licensed individual. And even the licensed people had very limited information on books on hypnosis. The first book that I ever got on hypnosis was back in about 1955. And it was an interesting book, and the only place you could find these books were like in the back of Popular Mechanics magazine. So I sent away for this one just for the hypnosis knowledge. And it also had a very interesting title. And this book was called How to Hypnotize Women. Costs about $2. Now, of course, the way you hypnotize women is exactly the same way that you hypnotize men. The only difference is if you had a book, How to Hypnotize Men, it wouldn't be a great seller. And when I go around the conventions and I mention to them, this is how I got started in the field, in the work by reading this book, there was an interesting thing that there was no author on this book. The person wouldn't put his name to it, you see. And I always wanted to know who the author was. So finally, at a convention of the National Guild in New Hampshire about 2 years ago, I was telling this to a class. And then I went home and I get a call from California from a very old friend of mine. I've known each other for many, many years. He's been a hypnotist and a magician and a student of the mind for more years than most of us have been alive. And he said, and he used to love to sit in my classes. He still loves to sit in my classes. He said, Jerry, he said, you're talking about that book, How to Hypnotize Women. He says, I know who the author was. Would you like me to tell you who it is? So I said, sure, I really want to know that. And I hear this sheepish little voice say, it was me. Well, some of you who have been in the profession know this man, and I'm sure he doesn't mind if I use his name, because he told me it was okay. Because he's so well known in our profession now, we call him the Dean of the American Hypnotists. And his name is Orman McGill. And for those of you in the classroom, if you look in the back wall on the bottom left over there, you'll see me with my arm around a little old man. And that's Orman today. Of course, this was many years ago, and he was quite a young fella back then. And we all cracked up. And he said, you know, we ought to rewrite this book as part of history of this is the way it was back in the 50s. And I don't know what happened to that idea. But then he sent me another book. I don't have it here because I sent it back to him. He was a little devil in his early years. And it was a picture of this kind of a Roman-looking soldier. And standing there like this with those little Roman skirts on. And here's this voluptuous-looking woman just staring up at him. And lightning bolts coming out of the hand. And it says, How the Chaldean Masters Hypnotize Their Female Slaves. Well, this was another book written by our friend. And of course, you see, back in those days, they were able to use imagery that you could never get away with today. And for example, on How to Hypnotize Women, this is a classic. Here is this monstrous woman chained with all these soldiers all over that are come up to maybe her ankle or something. I have no idea what this has to do with anything, but it's just one of those pictures in the book. The other book I got back in those days, and by the way, if you can get an original of How to Hypnotize Women, it's worth a lot of money. This is a photocopy. I've got my original sealed in plastic because they're worth so much money. This one also was one of my early textbooks that I bought, again from Popular Mechanics, which was called 25 Lessons in Hypnotism. And it was a very, very good book of the period. And this was about 1960, I think this book came out. And it was a very good book, and even reading it today, it's probably what a lot of you were taught in some of the classes you've taken. So those were the books that were available. Thank God we've moved on, and we've gotten ourselves now to where we have a lot of good books available. Without a doubt, if you said, okay, I only have enough money to buy one book. I'm sure or hope that all of us are not quite in that position, but if that would be the case, then the question would be, what book should I buy with my available funds? In my mind, there is only one that stands out head and shoulder above every other book, and that simply is this little book, little green book. Sometimes it's maroon, depending on the printer and what kind of ink he has, I guess. But it's simply called Hypnotherapy by Dave Ellman. And this is a short, a condensed book of a class that was audio taped, and little parts of it are taken out of that class, and it shows how he works with people for all sorts of medical problems in here: phobias, stuttering, dentistry, anesthesia, sleeping, depressions, just so many things. And it's just the exact pattern of the words that he used while he was working with the people up in front of the classes when he was teaching doctors back in those days. So it's a fabulous book. I highly, highly recommend it. Another book was written by one of my students a few years ago, which is a terrific book. It's called Answer Cancer. And this is a book written by Steve Parkhill. Steve did a fantastic job on this book. It's actually not only dealing with cancer, but what is people who have classified as having incurable illness. All sorts of problems, and I've seen Steve take people who have everybody else has given up on, just flat given up on, sent them home to die. And they now are living healthy lives. Their problem is gone, and it's absolutely amazing. He is working with a hospital, I believe, up north, and I can't remember the name of it, to document his work, and I think it's going to be exciting when those studies are completed. This is a book that you can get all of these on the internet, on Amazon.com, you know, that one, or any bookstore you can order them. This I don't know if you can get anymore, but it's just a fun book to read, and it really tells you a lot about that fellow named Freud. Anybody ever study Freud or heard of him? Sure we have. Freud was an interesting man. And this is called Freud on Hypnosis. There are many, I mean, it's amazing what I hear out there about what people say Freud did with hypnosis and what he didn't do. Well, this book pretty well cleans up the reality of how Freud worked with hypnosis, and it's good base information for us. And I say base information because everything we know is like at any given moment we're at the top of a pyramid, and what we learn kind of leads us up to the top. So it's good we get that good base that holds up the pyramid. And I like this book. It's written by Dr. Milton Klein, and it's published by Agora Press, but I'm sure it's out of print. But if you're like me and like to nose around in old bookstores, I think you can find a lot of these kind of books in old bookstores. One of the... anybody interested in past life here? That's it, one in this class. That's unusual. Well, you need to have a background in it. You need to understand it, because you're going to be dealing with this phenomena whether you like it or not. Because when you do regression work, a portion of the people you work with, and we'll get into this in more detail later, will regress to what they perceive to be a previous existence. There was a good book put out by a fellow by the name of Dr. Brian Weiss, MD. Dr. Weiss is a MD psychiatrist down in Miami. He was chief of psychiatric medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital down there, and he was working with a woman, 144 sessions, and just wasn't able to get any place with her. And he didn't have a clue what he wanted to do with her next. And so he was taught hypnosis during his internship up in New Jersey, and he said, well, I'll just try this hypnotic induction. He really didn't know what to do. He had no clue. And so he just used a progressive relaxation induction on this woman. She dropped back into a spontaneous regression to a previous existence. He had no clue what to do. And this book is a book of discovery by a person who is so innocent and really unknowing about hypnosis, and how he discovers how hypnosis works. The woman got tremendous benefit. She started to come back, and very quickly her problems disappeared after working with him a few sessions. He wrote this book, and he wrote another one, From Time into Healing, which is more of a documentary book where he's researching the situation more, and other physicians are kicking in information also, which is a very interesting book. So I highly recommend this one, although it's not a really good book on hypnosis technique. We were teaching his wife, she's up here in one of our pictures, and she said it was kind of comical. When she was transcribing the audio tapes from his classes, he would have a woman back in the 17th century churning butter. Well, you know how long it takes to churn butter? Forever. And he didn't know what to do, so let's move forward. He just waited until she got done churning the butter, you see. So it's kind of of course, he's much beyond that now, and he travels all over the country doing lectures and talks, and it's a fantastic book, and I really enjoy that book also. There's a great book out for medical people, not only, this is called Hypnosis, a New Tool in the Nursing Practice. Not only for nurses, this is a great book on hypnosis for medical problems. It goes into all sorts of interesting things on anesthesia, disguised hypnotic techniques in the hospital, things on that order. Some of these books we have available for sale in the class, some of them we don't, but later on in the week we'll show you what we have and what we don't. This is a great book. This is really good. Hypnosis in the Operating Room. The author on this it's edited by a fellow named Gil Boyne. It's author-less. It's stories by nurses using this, and you can get it from Westwood Publishing Company, or I believe we have some of them left here also. Hypnosis, New Tool in the Nursing Practice, by Westwood Publishers in California, but we have that one if you're interested in it. There are other books. Now, this book here, some people like it, some people don't. It's called Hypnosis and the Relief of Pain, and it's done by Professor Ernest Hilgard and Josephine Hilgard, his wife. I think it's a fair book. I think it's a fair book. I think the wife wrote it. I'm not sure, but it sounds like it is. It's very medically oriented, so if you like reading medically oriented books with lots of charts and graphs and things on that order, it's a good book for you. It has some wonderful techniques in it, and you can get this book here. It can be ordered in any bookstore, I'm sure. That's a good book. I enjoyed reading the book. Probably this one you will not find in any bookstore. There was a physician by the name of Bernheim many, many years ago who was one of the real discoverers of modern hypnotic technique. And this book has been published under several different names. In this particular one, it's Hypnosis Suggestion in Psychotherapy. This is a fantastic book. Dr. Bernheim was so honest. He wrote about things that later Dave Ellman took Bernheim's basic structure, it was in a long form, and condensed it to a very brief technique that works so effectively. So Bernheim discovered many, many techniques that we use today that are considering those lightning fast techniques, only he didn't know he did it, because it was, when he did it, it was the long form where Ellman shortened it down and really made it usable. But this is a book about an honest man and discovery about hypnosis, and I think it's a fantastic book. This can be found in old bookstores. I don't think you can go ahead and buy this one anymore, but it's a wonderful book. This book you can probably still get. It's by it's called Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis in Medicine, Dentistry, and Psychology, and it's written by a doctor by the name of Kroger, William Kroger, K-R-O-G-E-R. Again, if you can't find this particular one, it's in the bookstores all over the place, in the used bookstores. This is a really interesting book, and it's interesting because historically Doctors originally learned from us non-doctors hypnosis. Then they formed their own schools and started teaching themselves and saying we were incompetent to teach them, which is where they are today. Kroger learned hypnosis based on old lay hypnotism techniques of the 40s and 50s, which are really outdated. But he was doing these things about the same time that Ellman was doing his work. And Ellman would go ahead and take a woman out of the audience, for example, who had his beginning of her 9th month of pregnancy, 8 months. And he would get her up in front of the class and said, how would you like to learn how to have your baby without the slightest discomfort? And of course, if you've ever had a baby, you know what your answer would be. And he would say, okay, just do exactly what I tell you to do, and we'll get this done for you right now. And he'd demonstrate it, and the woman would go have the baby without any discomfort after about 15 minutes of training. In Kroger's book, although it's very good in many areas, in some areas it comes from the bias of this old training, in where he says, only 25% of women can be helped with childbirth, where Ellman was getting a minimum of 95% in a very quick period of time. So it's a matter of the bias of training that we have leads us to what we write in our books, which is natural and normal, but just to show you the difference in the skills. So that's a good book. That's all over the place. You can find that. And those are just some of them. There's some other good books out there, but that's a start. And you can go from there, and we can recommend other books for you. I want to go over what we're going to be doing in the class, what we're going to cover. Some of you in the class are very experienced hypnotists, and you've been working in the field for a number of years. Others of you have no training whatsoever in hypnosis. So in this class, which is the basic intermediate portion, we are going to assume that all of you have no training in hypnosis. We're going to start from the very beginning, and if we hang in and do what we ought to do, we'll take you well beyond what's advertised and show you quite a few advanced techniques even in this basic intermediate portion of the class. So that's where our beginning on it. We're going to teach you also something that I am extremely reluctant to teach. Reluctant in that I don't want to teach this, but I have to. And I don't know of anybody else who is teaching this, by the way. So we're going to teach you something called the hypnotic seal. Now, the seal was laughed out of existence many years ago. What happened many years ago is there was a group of dentists in New Jersey. They had their own kind of dental hypnosis organization. And they would get a patient in deep hypnosis for dental work. And then they would give the patient this suggestion. They would say, from this moment on, no one other than a qualified doctor will be able to hypnotize you. We're giving you this suggestion because there's a lot of amateurs out there who could harm you, and it's for your protection. So nobody other than a qualified doctor from this moment on will be able to hypnotize you. The people would accept that suggestion because, number one, they didn't know anything about hypnosis. It sounded logical to the patient. And also we teach, and it's basically true, that nobody's going to give you a suggestion of amnesia for something that you're always going to remember. They say you won't remember something, you normally will, unless, and the exception to the rule is if a doctor tells you that in hypnosis and he gives you a good reason why it's in your best interest to have amnesia for a suggestion. So in this situation, the doctor would say, and you'll have no memory of this, and this is for your protection, so nobody can ever take it away from you. Now these people would go out then to see you to stop smoking, and you've seen on their client history form that they've been to hypnosis many times. They love it. They had a wonderful time. They wrote down the induction that they used with success, and so you duplicate it, and you can't even get them to close their eyes. They have been sealed off against hypnosis by anybody but a qualified doctor, which was kind of a shooting themselves in the foot for the dentist, because what dentists didn't realize is a lot of people don't think of dentists as doctors, that only MDs are doctors. And so many times the dentist would seal them off from themselves after that, you see. Well, I think that's horrible. I think it's unconscionable. There's never been a recorded situation of hypnosis hurting anybody. But all of a sudden, over the last year and a half, my students have been calling me up saying, Jerry, somebody is teaching the seal out there. We don't know who it is yet, but we're getting people coming in that are sealed off on against hypnosis. So we had to go back to teaching the seal. The hardest thing about breaking a seal is discovering it. Most people, because they're never taught about the seal, have no idea what's going on. Somebody comes into their office and they're not hypnotizable, they say, oh, you're resistant. And the people aren't resistant, they love hypnosis. But because the seal was never even mentioned to them, they become frustrated. It's bad for the client, it's bad for the hypnotist's morale, it's a lose-lose situation. So we're going to teach you, number one, how to identify the seal and how to break the seal. And to do that just so fast it's unbelievable. And again, knowing now already at this point that the seal is out there, you'll know that if somebody is not going into hypnosis and they really want to and they've been there before and they're not being forced into your office with a gun at their head, that maybe this is an option that's going on. We'll be able to show that. Why am I reluctant to teach this? I'm reluctant to teach this because I don't want you using it as a marketing technique. Nobody will be able to hypnotize you except me from now on. Well, if I ever hear that, I'm going to hypnotize you through a sneaky little way, and I'll get even with you. So don't do it. And let's stay honorable and above board. So we're going to teach you that. You're going to have your final exam, which you'll all pass. You people at home will have your exam, which you'll do well on. And you'll all get a, what is that term? A certificate suitable for framing. Is that how they say that thing? And you'll look great. And you'll all do just fine in the class. Give you my personal philosophy about hypnosis, first of all. Not that it means anything to you, but it means something to me. And it has evolved over many years. I think hypnosis is so powerful, so enormously powerful. In the 200 years or so that we have documented, recorded history of hypnotic technique, I think we have reached a finite point, a leaping off point, where over the next 5 or 10 years at the most, we are going to be able to discover new things and new techniques that are going to cause quantum leap in what we're able to do in this work. And I'll give you the reasons why as we go through the class of some of the new discoveries that are just coming out now, that are so fantastic, if they're real, if they are workable, that could change everything in healing and in the work, not only in medicine and hypnosis, just everything. I think it's a magnificent time for a young person to get into the work. And for us oldies, it's a great time too. We still got a little bit of road to go. Freud was an interesting individual. He had a lot of problems. He used hypnosis, and we'll talk a little bit more about him. But he got frustrated with it because he couldn't control it. The inductions of the period were 2-3 hours long. And there was a lot of reasons, and he decided to give it up. And that was the one thing that set hypnosis, the growth of hypnosis, back for many, many years. But you know, Freud always had his ear to the hypnosis wall. He always wanted to know what was going on. Now, he died in 1939. But his nephew used to come around to hypnosis conventions for years. And he had audio tapes of Freud. And it was very interesting what Freud said a couple of months before he died. He said, you know, he said, I've been studying hypnosis. And this is back in 39. We still didn't know much about hypnosis back in 39. But he simply said, had I known what hypnosis could be used for and how powerful it could be for transformation, I never would have developed those silly psychoanalytical techniques that people today still think are so great. He said hypnosis is the poor man's psychotherapy, the man without months and years of insurance available to him. But for the individual that has to have somebody get in there, fix him, and get out of there. And that's what hypnosis does. So even Freud learned before he died. I wish the guy was alive today to see what could have happened since 1939. The biggest problem you will face as a hypnotist, and not you new hypnotists, but you hypnotists that have been out there for a while working, correct me if I'm wrong. The biggest problem you face when you first start is fear of failure. And because you have that fear, you don't sometimes have the aggressiveness. Now, I don't mean an aggressiveness that you're attacking your clients, but a mental aggressiveness that says, by God, I can do it, I can do anything, I'm going to clean this person's clock, they're going to leave my office so much better than when they came in. No, some of you go out there and you say, well, I only took a course that's 50 or 60 or 100 hours long or whatever it may be. How could I possibly do something? That it took a psychiatrist, high school, college, medical school, internship, sitting for boards, practicing, and he can't cure a phobia. You're telling me I'm getting rid of one in 45 minutes for somebody? Yes. And you become very unsure because of your fear, you say. We're going to program that out of you. We're not going to allow you to leave this class that way. This class you're going to leave as a tiger. You're going to be able to do those things, and you're going to attack nicely, professionally, but certainly you're going to be able to do the work. Finally, I consider hypnosis just an absolute phenomenon. Think about it. How many hypnotists do you meet in your normal daily travels in life? I don't know if you've ever met one other than at a hypnosis convention or you went to a hypnotist to stop smoking. But in your regular travels, you don't meet one. It's a phenomenon in that if you hypnotize a person in front of another person, the person being hypnotized generally doesn't have a clue what you're doing or how you do it. And to the person watching, they're just aghast. They don't know what's going on. It's a total phenomenon to those individuals. And it's exciting. It's thrilling. And when you get good at this, it's just more fun than it's the most fun you can have with your clothes on, is doing hypnosis. I'll tell you right now. I'll edit that out of the tape later. Okay, this morning, the first part of the class, let's move through some of the more slug-out stuff that we have to get through the first part of the first day. So let's talk a little bit about the history of hypnosis. Get a little bit of base of that pyramid. We're not going to cover much of it. We're going to hit the high points. You can read history of hypnosis and all the hypnosis books. They have chapters and chapters on history. So let's just talk about it a little bit. What do you think the oldest profession in the world is? Why are you ladies laughing that way? Guys aren't laughing.
No.
What is it? Or what has it always been stated? Prostitution. Well, that's the perception, but it's wrong. It's a wrong perception. Don't blame you for not knowing it's a wrong perception, but it is. Hypnosis is the oldest profession in the world. Think about it. For those of us who read the Bible once in a while, what did God say? Or the Bible says, it says he put Adam into a deep sleep, plucked a rib, and made woman. Well, that sounds like hypnosis to me. So hypnosis is there before that other thing that you're giggling about, you say. But seriously, we can trace hypnosis back to the Greek and Roman days. They used to have things called sleep temples, where people with all sorts of illnesses, both physical and mental, would go into these temples, and they had like stone elevated tabs, and people would lay tables, and these people would lay down on these tables. The priest would come over to them, and they had no clue what they were doing, so maybe they'd wave their finger over their face or do some kind of rattles or whatever it may be, and the person would go into a trance-like state. Why? Because they anticipated it. And throughout the class, you'll hear me say over and over again, the most powerful mental law is what the mind expects to happen tends to be realized. You people in medicine, you better hold on to that one. Enhance the client's mental expectancy of a positive outcome, and you're going to get it more often than not. So these people would go into this trance state. And of course the priest didn't have any idea what to do, so they just walked away. And after a period of time, whatever it may be, 10 minutes to 2 or 3 hours, the people would emerge from this state, and their problems were mostly gone, or certainly a heck of a lot better than they were when they first walked in there. And this happened throughout recorded history. It still today is a way of treating people in some of the more primitive tribes in Africa. Your witch doctor does the same thing. Enhancing the imagination, creating mental expectancy, and miracles happen. So we see this. During the Middle Ages, sorcerers and wizards kept it alive. It was during this period that it was the evil connotation came out of it, where we had that Svengali type of a guy, and that's where all the spinning discs started to be developed, and pictures of evil people with their fingers out and rays and lightning bolts going into the individual's eyes, and usually it was always a voluptuous woman who was getting zapped, you see. Women took a beating in hypnosis advertising over the years, you see. And in those days it was considered more of an evil than a power. Modern hypnosis, though, the way we really think about how it works, or the beginning of suggestion for effect, started in about 1772 with a physician called Anton Mesmer. We've all heard of Dr. Mesmer. He was a Viennese physician practicing in Paris. And he was the type of an individual who said there always has to be a better way, a rare type. Remember, new ideas, concepts, and techniques generally do not come online through discovery, experimentation, and testing. They usually move forward from funeral to funeral. When the old power mind dies off, the new thoughts come in and new things come online. And so it was back in those days. Dr. Mesmer did not like the way that most people were treated for the main disease. What was the main disease back then called? You got any idea? It's called consumption. That means you don't know what it was, but it's consumption, so we just give it that label. Do you remember how they used to treat people for consumption back in the 1700s? You slit them open and bled them. You would bleed out the bad blood, you see. Well, obviously, this made a person stronger and healthier, didn't it? As their blood drained. So Mesmer says, there's got to be a better way, always keeping his eyes open. So one day he's coming out of this theater in Paris, late at night, and I love the terms that they write about in the books, and he looks down the road and he sees what was called a street urchin. You know, a guy in kind of rags, and he's got these people, he's just going boom, and these people are dropping into this trance-like state. And Mesmer goes over to him and he says, what are you doing? I see you going like this and like this. What's happening? He goes, well, he said, he told him he was a doctor and he's very interested in this. And he says, well, I've got these new discoveries that I've got. They're called magnets. And when I pass the magnet across the people in front of them, up and down and left and right, they drop into the trance state like this. Isn't it interesting? So Mesmer says, yes, that's very interesting. And he thought about that and he said, I want to figure this one out. So he went out to ye old magnet shop, and wherever you get magnets in those days, you see, and he bought himself some magnets. He made a wooden frame, about 3 foot by 2 foot, with chicken wire nailed to the bottom of it, put these magnets in it. His philosophy was there is this magnetic force around the earth, which there is, and not only the earth has a magnetic force, but we all as individuals have a magnetic force. And if the earth and the individual's magnetic force are the same and in balance and harmony, we feel better. If they're all going opposite directions, we have hissies or whatever what it may be. So he got this table in his office that was aligned to true north. He used to lay the people down on them. He'd get an assistant on one time, and they'd take this frame with the chicken wire, and they would move it up and down over the body. And of course, as they're doing this, they're saying to each other, now watch how the person goes into this trance-like state. Well, the person isn't dead. They're hearing this. So the next thing you know, boom, they're out like the old proverbial light in deep trance. You see, people back in the 1700s were a lot better off in some ways than we are today. They were very highly suggestible. As we became more cool, we lose our suggestibility. We always want to know why. Back then they just assumed things, and they had beliefs. They believed in fairies, and they believed in magic, and they believed in all these things, you see. So to believe in this is no big deal. They went into trance. And Mesmer had no clue what to do. So he did nothing. He just walked away and left the assistant there. And just like the Greek and Roman temples, after a period of time, these people would emerge. And they were better, or almost all better. And I don't care whether it was a physical illness or a mental problem, there was tremendous healing going on here. What the mind expects to happen tends to be realized. Well, by word of mouth, it went all over town. Hey, you want to finally get cured, you go to Dr. Mesmer. He's going to fix you. This guy can do it. So pretty soon his practice was getting so big that he figured he had to do something to control all these people. So the first thing he did was he built out in his lobby, his waiting room, if you will, big waiting room. Looked like a park picnic table, you know, with the bench and the wooden, and he cut holes in the center about every 3 feet. Attached to the bottom of these holes were jars about that deep, filled with distilled water and metal filings, and he had a copper rod coming up and then turned 90 degrees. And he told, the word was out that you could just go to Mesmer and go into his office, and while you were waiting, if you needed additional healing, you'd get it, but meanwhile you could probably cure your problems by sitting at this bench and rubbing this medical, this copper magnetized rod over the affected area. And people were getting cured in the waiting room. So much so that Mesmer got a good business going manufacturing these banquets, he called them, for the rich and elite. You know, a lot of people have your pool rooms and things like that. Well, a lot of people in those days had the banquet room, you see. And they didn't feel so good, they'd go into their banquet room and just work on curing themselves. And many times it worked. Why? What the mind expects to happen tends to be realized. Business got so good. Business got so good that he had to go with the assembly line routine. And what he did is out in the backyard, he built what today we would call in-ground hot tubs. And each one of them would hold about 30 people, and they'd sit on a bench and the water would be about that high. But when he did this was unique. He did it right at twilight. He'd get all the people, of course you can only do this in the summertime in France, and he had 3 of these. People would be sitting there. And he had what today we would call these tiki torches we can buy in Kmart or whatever it is, all around the place, flickering lights. In each one he had a shill who would be saying, oh, you aren't going to believe what happened to my friend. He was here the other day. Mesmer cured this guy. He had this horrible problem. Unbelievable, the power, you know. Oh, each sitting on each side of him was this metal rod they held on to. There was, for their feet were on top of metal filings. And these guys are just talking up, you know, these magical, the tremendous cures that had taken place. So the people are getting, their mental expectancy is so high, their imagination is so powerfully enhanced that now it's almost all dark. And finally, out of the gloom comes Mesmer. Now, Mesmer was a pretty awesome looking dude. He had really big, hairy, bushy eyebrows, which he powdered so they were white. Huh? Depending on which was in the laundry, he either wore his black cape with the yellow starburst or his white cape with the yellow starburst and that wrapped around him, and the famous Mesmer cap, which is the old artist cap, you know, that flopped over. And he had, I don't have mine anymore, it got legs and walked out, so somebody in one of my classes bought me this. He had an ivory cane, which I don't want an ivory cane because then we got to kill elephants and we don't want to do that. But anyway, this will work. He had this ivory, just imagine it's an ivory cane. And people would go, as he walked out of the gloom into the flickering of these tiki torches, a great hush went over. There's Mesmer, there's Mesmer. And he wouldn't say a word. And he'd slowly walk over to the first hot tub. Where is the person who works for him sitting there? And he would look at that individual and he would go, and of course the individual went, dropped into trance. Well, she's sitting next to him. She's watching this. She's so expecting this to happen to her. He walks over to her and goes, and she goes, now maybe she didn't want to go, but she said, if I don't go, I'll embarrass Mesmer, and I don't want to do that, and be the only one that doesn't go, you see. So he would slowly walk up and down all around these hot tubs, bop, bop, and people were dropping like rocks. Now, again, because when everybody was in trance, Mesmer had no idea. The concept of therapeutical suggestion had not been developed. He didn't know what to do, so he left. And he had assistants just with towels. You know, when people come out, give them a towel and send them home. They pay it on the way in. So you didn't have to worry about collecting the dough on the way out, you see. So at their own rate, at their own speed, these people emerged from this state, and his cure rate was fantastic. Fantastic. He had so much business that the other doctors in town were not getting any patients. Now this was Panicville at this point. So the doctors, you know, there's the good old boy syndrome, you see. Anyway, the doctors all get together and they went to the king and they said, you know, king, this is not a good thing. We're going broke. You know, we can't make it to the golf. Well, I don't know if they had golf then, but you get the idea. So the king says, yeah, we'll do something about this. So he sent an emissary to Mesmer and said, look, if you stop doing this, I will give you X amount of money a year. We do that with crops in this country, don't we? Just to get them off the back and go out of business. So they went over and made the proposal to Mesmer, and he said no. Now, some people think it was because it wasn't enough money. But if you read enough about Mesmer, you will know that this man was not money-oriented. He was healing-oriented. And he truly believed he had come across something that was brand new, needed a lot more work to understand what was going on, but he wasn't about to give it up. So the doctors panicked and they formed a hypnosis investigative committee where they were going to investigate this to see if it was real and if it was a danger to the population or whatever. Now, it was very interesting. There was one man on this committee who maybe some of you might recognize the name. He was an American. He was over there visiting at the time. His name was Ben Franklin. And Ben was on the committee. So they studied it, and Ben was the only one who figured out what was going on. He said, this has nothing to do with magnets. It's obvious to me that these people are merely reacting to a suggestion, whether it's direct or indirect, that something's going to happen, and they expect it to happen, so somehow the mind's making it happen. Boom! He stumbled right over the concept of hypnosis. But of course, they didn't listen to him. This deal was figured out before they even made this committee formed, so they gave Mesmer a cease and desist order and banished him, and he died in poverty a couple of years later out in the countryside, you see. But he was the first one that got us really on the path of being able to do something. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe it was that street urchin that really started this thing, huh? Whoever he may be. Anyway, the next significant individual in the field was about 1840, and this was, if I ever raise my finger like this, it's probably on an exam, or could be. A Dr. James Braid. Dr. Braid, B-R-A-I-D, was a student of Mesmer's from afar, a student of his writings and things in that order. And he said, you know, I think Mesmer's got something here. I want to go ahead and investigate this. But, see, back when Mesmer was doing it, they called it mesmerism or animal magnetism, things in this order. He said, if I say I'm going to do mesmerism or animal magnetism, they're going to want my butt into the woods just like they did Mesmer. He says, I got to think of a different name. That's all I got to do. He says, what can I call this stuff? He said, well, when people are in this state, it looks like they're asleep. Maybe they are asleep. So he says, I know, I'll name it after the Greek god of sleep called Hypnos. I-P-N-O-S-E, I think. Hypnos. Well, quickly it got changed to hypnosis. And very soon, James Braid discovered that this had nothing to do with sleep. That people, as a matter of fact, the more they went into the state, the more alert they became. So he wanted to change the name of it to monoideaism, or the focuses of a person's mind on one idea or one thing, which was the other person's voice. But by this time, hypnosis had already taken root. It was like a cool name. Monoideaism really was kind of a nerd name. And so he couldn't get rid of this term that had bastardized to hypnosis at this point. And so that's how we got our name. And it's the best and the worst of our profession. Because when you say you're a hypnotist, some people don't even want to talk to you. A lot of people, irrespective of title and degree, will say this to you: don't look me in the eye. You see, because unless you study it, it doesn't matter whether you're, what education level you have, you're ignorant about hypnosis. So you have the same philosophies that other people do. Don't look me in the eye. And they're serious when people say this. Don't you think they're kidding? Had a great time one day. When I was up here about a year ago, I caught this tremendous eye infection. It didn't hurt, but this eye turned so red, just a deep blood red. I'm going to my ophthalmologist, we're trying different drops on this and the other thing, and it just was so virulent, it just wouldn't go away. And I really didn't want it to go away, as long as there was no problem with it, you see. And, this watch, it was this watch in my college my wife bought me. The band had broken, so I took it down to this jeweler, and here's this woman, jeweler, who, see, we live in a very religious area here in the land in north central Florida. The Bible Belt, or the buckle of the Bible Belt in this area. Anyway, she's putting a new band on me, and she says, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, "Well, I didn't want to say. So I finally said, "I'm a hypnotist." She said, "A hypnotist?" She said, "A hypnotist?" She said, "Don't look me in the eye." I said, "Look, don't worry about this eye, but baby, you better watch out for this one." And this fiery red eye came out. She threw me the watch. She said, "Get out of my store and never come back again." Thought she was kidding, but she wasn't kidding. And that's spooky because it's, you know, we're trying to break through this word of hypnotism and the negative connotation that's going on out there, and that's our biggest problem. When you hang that on the door, that's your problem. On the other hand, if you're a medical doctor, a physician's assistant, a mental health counselor, a nurse, or whatever, you never have to use the word. I'm going to teach you how to relax medically. Boy, we're able to do so much more that way. And there's no fear, and boom, they're right off to Cleveland in a heartbeat, you say. But when you say you're a hypnotist, that's when you've got to get rid of all the fears that people have before you're able to do the work. So I highly recommend if you're in a profession where you don't have to use a word, don't. Just do it. I've got lots of people out there that are licensed, and they just say, "Look, I just want to teach you how to relax, and we'll get a lot more done that way." And boom, they just drop right in so fast, it's unbelievable. The next point we move forward is another doctor by the name of James Esdale, E-S-D-A-L-E, around 1880. Now, he had an interesting job. He was the chief of surgery at a Calcutta prison in India. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a prison in Calcutta, but let me explain to you what it's like. Even today, it's unsanitary. They still have the ditch going down the middle where all of human waste just goes out into the street, connects with another one, and goes that way. It's mobbed, it's hot, the sweat, the stench of human bodies is terrible. And yet Esdale did over 1,000 major surgical procedures with hypnosis used as the only anesthesia, and did it tremendously. He was and not only that, even by today's standards of how many people die in post-surgery, it was probably about the same level it is today. People were just not dying to speak of when they were using hypnosis as an anesthesia, because all of the suggestions that they survive and all these things that he did, and we'll get into that later, left people with a powerful belief system they're going to be fine, and they were. Well, Dr. Esdale was so thrilled that he was in one of these individuals that documented everything. He says, I'm going back to England and I'm going to make a presentation to the Royal Society of Medicine on what I do. And he did. And he showed all the documentation of all these different surgical procedures he did. And then he said, you know, folks, there was no anesthesia in that period. So they just did surgery on a screaming patient. Can you imagine what that's like? So he basically said there's no reason for people to have this pain. You know, I will instruct some physicians to become instructors, and they can just go ahead and teach everybody how to do this. It's not difficult at all. Well, the committee took a break, and they met the next day. And the next day they said to him, they said, we've thought about this, and we now direct you to cease and desist the use of hypnotism for relieving a patient's pain. Well, his face turned ashen, and of course he asked the question, why? And they told him, God invented pain for man to feel it. You're going against the will of God by removing pain. Now, what were they really saying? We are stuck in our rut. We do what we do. It's going to take a long time for us to learn a new skill. Just go away and leave us alone. And that's exactly what Esdale did. He went away. He went back to Calcutta, continued doing the work as he always did till the day he died, and many thousands more people were blessed by the interaction with him. The interesting part about this, though, and this is probably the only documented case of this that I'm aware of in the world, in the history of the world, documented. About a year later, a new chemical was discovered in the medical profession. It was called chloroform. Now they could go ahead and put some cotton over a person's nose, like in a tea strainer or whatever, pour a little chloroform on them, and the person would go out, they'd be anesthetized, and now they could do the surgery. I always think it must have been very interesting back in those days when they first started using it. As the doctor was leaning over pouring the chloroform, I wonder how many doctors just went plump on the floor while they were doing it, you see. But in any event, the interesting and documented thing about this is for the first time in recorded history, we have documented proof where God changed his mind. Isn't that fascinating? And so now we had a mechanistic way of rendering people unconscious, and that set the medical world on fire. But what did it do to hypnosis? Well, it sent hypnosis into what we call the hypnotic dark ages. Because the only people who were really using hypnosis for anything back then were the MDs, were the doctors. Now they had this mechanistic, they didn't need the work of doing the hypnosis. The only people that kept hypnosis alive for 100 and more years were the traveling stage hypnotists who would go from village to village putting on these stage hypnosis shows. And we owe them a tremendous debt. Because of their work, we learned many of the skills that we use in the therapeutical intervention today, especially in the induction techniques, in some of the semantical interventions that we use today. So we owe them an honored place in our profession. I think it's time that we move on from that personally, but I think they should hold an honored position for place in our history. So it went away. It finally came back during the First World War. There was a group of British corpsmen, enlisted men, who had a little hypnosis club. During the First World War, there was this one battle that is legendary. It's called the Battle of Somme. On this particular battle, the Americans and the English and the French were on one side of this field that was about 2 miles long and about 1 mile deep. The Germans were on the other end, on a hilltop. And for the first time, they were using a new weapon, which was called a machine gun. And they were just, like 50 yards apart with these machine guns. Somebody over there yelled, "Charge!" And here comes charging the Americans, the English, and the French. And the Germans just coolly said, "Relax, have a cigarette." Their version of "don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes." Finally, they got close enough and these machine guns opened up. About 100 of them. And they just cut men down like wheat. thousands and thousands of men, almost 1 million men, were killed in that one day on that field. Well, the corpsmen quickly ran out of chloroform, and they didn't know what else to do for these people who were horribly wounded. So they decided to just try some hypnotic techniques, and they were absolutely amazed. Once they said, if you do what I tell you to do, the bleeding's going to stop and you're going to be okay. The people would do it. And they were able to stop bleeding. Certainly venous bleeding was stopped. Arterial bleeding was really slowed down tremendously. But really, in many ways, the most important thing was they were able to eliminate the soldier from going into shock, which was the big killer. Well, the American corpsmen were watching this. They didn't have a clue what was going on, but those British corpsmen saved hundreds and hundreds of people. And they then got with the Americans and started teaching them how to do it. And the Americans were bringing it online. There was another battle in the First World War where one of the American soldiers was using this, and a medical officer was there, or some officer came up and ordered him to stop it. It was the work of the devil. Well, I'd rather have the devil work on me and save my butt than not, you see. In any event, after that war, the Americans started their own hypnosis clubs at the enlisted level. And it was used during the Second World War by a group of American corpsmen in the Pacific Theater of Operation, in Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal to be specific. And they did tremendous work with the people that were hurt and saved a lot of lives because they weren't going into shock. And then finally, in the Korean conflict, which was a brutal, brutal war, where there was one particular story that came out where we were attacking to the rear, where we were being whomped, our butt was whomped, and we had to walk back to Incheon quite a distance in this horrible cold weather. Many, many people were getting frostbite, amputations were rampant, but those who had hypnosis were instructed that their feet were warm, the circulation was going to increase through all their feet and arms and fingers, their body was going to be warm and snuggly, and none of these people at all suffered any frostbite whatsoever. And the people that were in the initial stages of it, it never got any worse, it just got better from that point. So that finally, in 1958, the American Medical Association determined that hypnosis was a useful tool. Now, after they said that, you'd think that, well, maybe they'd start hypnosis schools and start teaching the doctors, but it never happened. And the doctors then went to people like Dave Ellman to learn the hypnotic techniques that gave them tremendous advantages in their office and in the operating theaters. And other people started teaching hypnosis back in those days, like Harry Aarons and Gil Boyne out in California, things in that order. So that about in the 70s, the doctors started opening up their own schools and teaching their own people. And now the training is available to anybody who wants to use it, which is the way it should be. So that's basically the history. You can get into more depth on it. But there's a secondary history that you really need to be aware of, because it comes up and belts you once in a while. And that's the religious history of hypnosis. There are many people out there today, I've already told you, are going to tell you it's the work of the devil. I came to work here this morning just to show you how rampant this is. And this was in my door. Now, what is this? Well, shocked me when I saw it. I was shocked, appalled, and somewhat disgusted, as they say. The rise of Satanism, seducing Americans' youth. And here it is, a whole thing on the dangers of Satanism or the occult. Well, these religious right people think we're cults, occult, Satan worshippers. And even though they don't particularly mention hypnosis in here, the person obviously felt that we better read this stuff because we were online. I did notice I found this yesterday morning. I had to come in, I brought coffee, so I brought it in yesterday. And I happen to know right next door to us we have a place called the Primitive Baptist Church, and they were in session. So I just think that maybe somebody walked next door. But actually this came out of Pinson, Alabama, Dial the Truth Ministries. But this is rampant. I mean, this is amazing out there. If you look at the history, Biblical literature, for those of you that are biblical scholars, I'm not, are replete with references that support your practice of hypnosis. And they list a whole bunch of paragraphs. If you're interested, I can give them to you. Genesis 15:12 and all these, Samuel 26:12. But also, for everything the Bible, apparently, it's a book of interpretation, isn't it? Depending on your position, you interpret it a certain way. The people out there will find plenty against hypnosis in the Bible, and these are the ones I want to focus on. I used to talk about, this in lectures, but I don't anymore, because at the end of a lecture in a couple of days, I'd get somebody mail me a Bible, and it was highlighted all the bad passages. And I literally had a whole closet full of Bibles. I could have went in the Bible business. So finally I stopped talking about religion. Not politics, but religion. But anyway, some of the things that they put this on is Leviticus 20:27, which says, "A man or woman who is a medium or a wizard shall be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones." I don't know what else you stone people with. Marijuana, maybe, I don't know. "Stoned with stones, and their blood shall be upon them." Or Deuteronomy 18:10-11, "There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter." Hey, I thought about it on occasion. "As an offering or a charmer or a medium or a wizard or a necromancer." Well, this is interesting. I knew I'm not a medium. I know I'm not a wizard. But one day, this is kind of funny. I raised my kids down in South Florida in a town called Plantation on the west side of Fort Lauderdale. We ended up with this enormous house that wrapped around the corner. I mean, take you forever to walk from one side to the other. Finally, the kids are gone. I said, we don't need this barn. So we sold the house in 2 days. Obviously, I put it up for sale too cheap. We had to get out. So I said, well, we wanted to buy something over by our office on the east side of town. So I said, let's rent for a year. Let's not rush into this. So we rented a townhouse. Nice townhouse. I really liked it. I didn't have to cut the lawn. I didn't have to do anything. And it was an interesting townhouse because out in the front, all the other people used to sit out in the afternoon and have wine and cheese or martinis, and we'd all yak, and it was a really nice, fun place to be. And I always like to invite the religious people in to talk to them, and they leave screaming after a few minutes. But, Jehovah's Witnesses, I love to have them. I'll edit that out. Anyway, one day I get the knock on the door, always around dinner time. So I go open the door, and here's a short little fat guy like me and this tall, skinny guy. I think he should have had a pitchfork in his hand. Boutonniere. And he says, short guy was a talker. He says, "I'm Reverend so-and-so, and I'm from the Baptist church down the street." Well, I've been past this Baptist church, and it was another one of these primitive Baptist church. "And we'd love to have you come down and join our flock." So I said, "I don't know if you want me in your flock." And I'm talking to him. Finally, I'm trying to get him to ask me what I do for a living. I said, Reverend, I said, because of what I do, I don't think you really would like to have me in your church. Son, God forgives everything. What do you do that could be so terrible? You look like a nice young man. I said, well, I am a nice young man, but I'm also a hypnotherapist. His eyes opened up as big as owl eyes. He leaped back, turned ruddy red in the face, started screaming at me. And he was calling me a wizard and a sorcerer and working for Satan. And, of course, the people they've been drinking martinis out front now for about an hour and a half, and they're about 3 sheets to the wind, and they're going, "Yeah, tell him." And then he says, "Not only that, you're a necromancer." And I had no clue what that meant. So I said, "Hold on a minute, don't go away." So I ran in the house, and I called my son. He was visiting, and he's studying to be a minister. So I said to him, "You still got that book on religious definitions?" And he goes, "Yeah." I says, "Look up necromancer and tell me what it means." So he did. And here's what necromancer means, that this guy was accusing me of. It's one who conjures up the spirits of the dead for purposes of magically revealing the future or influencing the course of events. Well, I have never conjured up a dead person that I know of. Sounds like a cool idea, but I just haven't done it. So I finally had enough. Dinner was ready, and Shirley had my favorite dinner, which was Back then it was pork chops burned to a crisp, mashed potatoes with cream corn on them. Oh, baby. Anyway, I go out, I said, you people are idiots. Get out of here. Get off my property. And of course the neighbors are going, yeah, yeah, get rid of these weird people. And that was the end of it. So pretty soon, another month or so later, we buy this little house. Now it's only about 1,700 square feet, but it was perfect just for the two of us. Real close to the office. I really liked it. So we're moving in, and you know how the neighbors are when you move into a new house. They're peeking out the window to see if a serial killer is moving in or whatever it may be. Anyway, I'm out there, and they're loading the furniture in. I see this guy right next door to me. And he looks a little familiar, a little ruddy-faced guy. So I go over to introduce myself. And just as I got there, it hits me. I said, and it hit him. I said, you're that preacher. He goes, you're that hypnotist. So I said, look, Rev, let's make a deal. I won't talk to you about religion. You don't talk to me about hypnotism. We'll have a truce, and we'll just have a nice life. So he agreed to it. And that went all okay for about a year, and then one day we had this local option vote on everybody should be equal, and you know, they called it a gay rights amendment and this and that and the other thing. So he comes out and he says, I meet him as he's coming out, don't you vote for number 10, which was the gay rights amendment. I said, you're really so strange. And the war was back on again, you know, just like that. I'd like to tell you the next story, but it would be on tape, so I would be very reluctant to tell you this little particular thing, so I won't. I'll tell you maybe later. Anyway, but it's funny. Most major religions accept hypnosis tremendously as having tremendous value. For example, back in 1955, the Pope said, I can't understand why all women aren't having hypnosis for childbirth. There is no reason for you to go through all the pain you're going through. You don't have to do it. So it's all your major religions think it's wonderful. Who's against it? Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses are against it. They're really against it. Let me tell you right now. I have a letter from one of my students that's an ex-Jehovah's Witness telling me what she went through as a Jehovah's Witness, and it was amazing. Where we live here in DeLand, we're only a couple of blocks from the biggest Jehovah's Witness temple. And so they're always knocking on my door. And they're knocking on my door in particular because as they're training people, they bring them to my house. Because I always say, look, I'll read your watchtower, but you got to read this letter from one of my students too. And of course the leader that's with them is so protective of these young kids they're bringing around that, oh, it's always amazing. Finally they've given up on me. I think I've been red flagged or something. Fundamentalist Baptist groups, same kind of a thing. You know, watch out for any of these religious organizations. They need a cause. These people always need a cause to keep their flock. Hypnosis is a great cause. Fight against the hypnotist. Fight against abortion. With your own personal belief, it doesn't matter. It's a buzzword. It's what keeps the flock really excited. And the other one is the Christian Scientists. Now this is a really interesting organization. Back in the 1800s in Maine, there was a wonderful hypnotist. Actually, he was a full-time clockmaker and a part-time hypnotist. And I loved the old New England names. His name was Phineas J. Quimby. Isn't that New England? Anyway, he was a hypnotist in this Maine town, and there was this woman who was dying of consumption. The doctors have done everything they could, and she was on her way out. She finally went to Quimby, and using hypnosis, he cured her of whatever it was that was bothering her. Well, she was amazed. She shouted throughout that time that Phineas Quimby was a greater healer than Jesus Christ. And so she decided that she wanted to learn hypnosis. So she went to Quimby, and he instructed her on the hypnotic techniques of the day. This woman then formed a church called the Christian Scientists. Her name was Mary Baker Eddy. Now, Mary Baker Eddy understood, make no doubt, the power of hypnosis. She used to watch Phineas Quimby do group sessions. There's a wonderful book. You talk about another book. I've got it upstairs. I'll show it to you at the break. called the Quimby manuscripts, which is written by Quimby, a story of, a ledger that he kept about his hypnosis work. Fascinating in his work with Mary Baker Eddy. The Quimby manuscripts, it's fascinating if you can get a hold of that one. Anyway, when she formed the church, she knew the power of hypnosis in group sessions. So what did she do? She preached against hypnosis. She'd get the flock hypnotized and then preach against the dangers of hypnosis. Why? So that nobody would study it, so they wouldn't realize she was using it on them, you see, kind of a thing. So those three, and today, Christian Scientists use hypnosis more than any other religion in a formal way out there. I mean, it's what their religion is based on. And yet they shout from the rafters that this is the most dangerous force on the planet, you see. Kind of cool. And they are the only religion that has an in-quote, in-print, formalized statement against the hypnosis and the practice of hypnotism. The other ones are just against it, and they'll tell you why as they wing it as they're talking to you, you say. Interesting. Okay. Let's talk about some quick misconceptions. That's enough of the history. Any questions about the history? You can read more about history any place. Those are just some of the high points. Some of the misconceptions. How many people in here have never been hypnotized?
Not that I know of.
That's the correct answer. You're hypnotized every single day. We'll talk about that. And the misconceptions are, especially among engineers. Engineers are really a pain in the butt when it comes to hypnosis, aren't they? They always want to know why. And so you do a long relaxation induction with an engineer. No, you smack an engineer, you punch him, you hit him, you punch him into hypnosis so they don't think. Just kidding. Okay. All right, some of the misconceptions. It doesn't look, act, or feel like most people think it should. A lot of people who have never been hypnotized may think that when they're in hypnosis, they are so totally deeply relaxed. Well, deep relaxation is one form of hypnosis, but it is only one form. And it's becoming more and more the less popular form because it takes too long. When you're in hypnosis, most people, not most, but many people think you're unconscious and you're zapped. I had a young man come to me for smoking. And when in the pre-talk, the time where we're just talking about hypnosis before we actually do it, I told him what it was and that he was going to be fully alert. He'd hear everything even better than he does now. He said, I don't want to do this. I thought you were just going to zap me and I'd wake up and I would be all better. That's called 2x4 hypnosis. They want us to whop them on the back of the head, give them suggestions, and they don't have to have any responsibility for their transformation. So he left because he didn't want to accept responsibility or be part of the process. A lot of people say all hypnosis is self-hypnosis, and I have a tendency to believe that. I think that really there's no such thing as a hypnotist. I think what we really are guides. And if people follow our guidance, we show them how they enter a particular state of mental and physical relaxation, if that's what we're looking for. If they follow our guidance and accept suggestions, they can have the transformation. And I like to tell people, I don't know if I've ever hypnotized anybody in my life, but I've showed people how they can enter hypnosis. I think that's probably more accurate. Don't ever think you're going to hypnotize anybody. Don't ever think you're going to have some kind of an awesome power. Because you're not. A lot of times I went into, when I was a young man, I went into hypnosis because I thought I was going to have a power. Especially when I became at the dating age. I thought I was going to really zap these gals and they were going to do anything I wanted them to do. Well, it didn't work. Rats. You can't control the mind of another person. All you can do is offer guidance. You're not unconscious. And that's a big thing out there. A lot of people think they can't hear, or they shouldn't be able to hear when they're in hypnosis. Well, if you can't hear, how can you follow instructions? That doesn't make any sense. Actually, the more you go into the hypnotic state, the more, my daughter used to say when she was a little girl, the more better your five senses get. Your sense of smell, hearing, vision, everything else becomes more and more improved. People that wear glasses in deep hypnosis, many of them take their glasses off and see perfectly, you see. You hear everything that's going on around you. I mean, it's amazing. You hear so much better than you normally do. You're so much more sensitive to sound. One of the biggies is a lot of people, especially spouses or significant others in your life, are frightened of hypnosis. And they're frightened of hypnosis because they're afraid that if you hypnotize them, they will reveal that little tete-a-tete in Cleveland a couple of years ago. And they're not going to take that risk, that you're going to dig that out of them, you see. Well, that's not going to happen. People are not going to reveal anything unless they want to for therapeutical purposes, and that means they'd go to a hypnotist, not to a wife or a husband to do that. Because the only therapy they're going to get by revealing that little tete-a-tete from the wife is going to be a divorce summons or something like that. So you're not going to tell any deep, dark secrets. The other thing is some people think they can be stuck in hypnosis. Well, I've never known anybody be stuck in hypnosis. You know, when I had my heart attack, we always teach that. We always teach that hypnosis is totally dependent on continued conversation between two people. If a pause happens long enough without telling the person that you're pausing, the client, the individual in hypnosis says, well, something must be wrong, so they just open their eyes and see what's going on. And it's totally dependent on that, you see. When I had my heart attack and I couldn't talk, the woman in trance sensed there was something seriously wrong, and she opened her eyes. And because she was still in a semi-hypnotic state, she somehow accepted her own suggestion, given to her by her, that she caused this. And after my heart attack, when I finally got back to work, she came in with jewelry for me as a gift. Well, I don't wear jewelry. I hate jewelry. But it was very nice of her. And I had to hypnotize her again, which was very difficult because she was scared to death I was going to drop dead again on her. To program her, it wasn't her fault. She had nothing to do with it. So you're going to emerge anytime you want. Anytime you want, the slightest thought that you don't want to be there, boing, your eyes open and you're out of there. It's a 100% total consent state at all times. You got to agree with everything that goes on or it's not going to happen. And you're going to remember everything after you emerge. You're not going to not know what's going on. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Now the rule is simply this. Schools over the years have taught something that we've discovered is wrong. A lot of schools don't want to change. But they're going to have to change in this particular area eventually. And that is, for many years, and maybe some of you have graduated from schools that teach this, they were taught that there are good subjects and bad subjects. Ernest Hilgard, genuflect now if you want to, the great professor, says in his books and his writing, hypnotizability is randomly dispersed throughout the general population. That means good subjects and bad subjects. That's bullshit. There is no such thing as a bad hypnotic subject. We are all human. We are all equally hypnotizable. Now the rule is simply this. People accept hypnosis in direct relationship to the amount of fear they have, period. A little fear, you're not going to get any hypnosis. A lot of fear, forget it. They'll run out of your office. Now, don't make the mistake that you're thinking it's fear of hypnosis. It could be fear of hypnosis, but it may be fear of other things. It may be fear of discovering what's causing them to be the way they are. It may be a fear of those other things, of revealing sensitive secrets. It can be any kind of a fear. So your job, if you're using hypnosis, is to eliminate fears before you do the session. Then you're going to get deep trance very quickly with everybody. Obviously, if you're not using the word hypnosis, forget about it. It's not even a factor. You don't even have to think about it. People accept hypnosis in direct relationship to the amount of fear they have, period. And it's up to you to discover the fear and eliminate it before you do the work if you are a practicing, in quote, hypnotist. Okay. Pretty easy to understand so far, isn't it? Okay. The first half of the first day, we just sludged through the base of the pyramid a little bit. Let's move on. Any questions on that? Anybody got a question about what hypnosis is or isn't that I maybe haven't covered up to this point that you think is something you've been thinking about?
Actually, I have a comment that I want to make. From your description, it sounds a great deal like a meditative state.
The difference between meditation and hypnosis is significant. Meditation is one form, again, one form of hypnosis. It's a pretty useless form in that when you go into meditation, it's just generally allowing yourself to get nice and relaxed and clear your mind, and whatever comes in and goes, comes in and goes. Hypnosis is more goal-oriented. We're going into this state for this purpose, and we're going to work specifically for this particular purpose, and we use the skills to do that. There are many different types of hypnosis, and meditation is one type of self-hypnosis. Sure.
Thinking of the hypersensitivity or the enhanced sensitivity.
Oh, yeah. You betcha. You betcha. You're right on with that one. Let's move on a little bit, and let's talk about some vocabulary that we use in our work. The hypnosis vocabulary is different than other vocabularies quite a bit. Some of the words that we use in our vocabulary sound the same as they do for other people, but our meaning is different. So let's go over some of the words that are significant. The first one, and I got a handout on this, so don't write it down. Actually, your handout's more complete than what I'm going to go over, but I'm going to hit the highlight one, so I'm not going to give it to you until I get done with this here. Abreaction. An abreaction is an emotional purging or reliving of a past traumatic event by the individual. Many abreactions are what we call ISEs, or initial synthesizing events, or the first event that ultimately caused the person to have a problem. For example, when you tell a person to go back to the first situation or event that caused you to have this, fill in the blank, whatever they're in your office for, and they regress back. Quite often they will regress to an abreaction, which may be hidden from the conscious mind. Because if the conscious mind will not allow you to remember something, if it feels that if you remember it, you will not be able to go through your day in some sense of normalcy. So, for example, a person, I'll never forget my first abreaction I ever had as a hypnotist. It scared me to death because it was so violent. And I was hypnotizing this man, and we'll talk more about regression techniques later, but he spontaneously regressed. Now, when some people have a need to deal with a problem, he was in my office to stop smoking. And he regressed to, he was on like the third or fourth landing craft that landed on Normandy Beach on the 6th of June on D-Day. And everybody in his boat, as soon as the gate went down, was killed. He just turned around and watched a bullet go. If you ever saw Private Ryan, it was very apparently similar to that scene they had in there. And he leaped over the side, and he was the only one that survived. And when he ran up on the beach, everybody around him was just getting totally destroyed in the most horrible, visually horrible ways that could possibly, no, we couldn't even imagine it. It's just not even imaginable. And he was back there, and he needed to deal with that terror that he went through back there. And here I was, 17 years old. I didn't have a clue what to do, you see. So nowadays, we've got to graduate you. If these things happen, you know what to do, so you don't run into that situation that I did. So it's reliving that event. Now, it is not remembering it. The remembering of a long past, or what you perceive to be a forgotten memory, is called hypermnesia. An abreaction is you are there. It is actually, in every sense of the word, happening all over again. Or no, not happening all over again. It's happening for the first time. You're right back there. So it can be pretty interesting work when you're dealing in that area. Age regression. That's the phenomena of returning in a person's mind to an earlier time or to an earlier life, if that's what they do. And again, you'll hear me say this when we talk about past life therapy. It is not our job as hypnotist or hypnotherapist or whatever the politically correct term is this week. It is not our job to believe in this or not believe in it. If you take the mental attitude that you deal with a person's problem where they perceive it to be, you're going to be in good shape. Don't say, get back here. You didn't fall off that Plymouth Rock in 1492. When was it? Whatever year it was. Amnesia, hypnotic amnesia. This is an interesting thing. All of us have some level of trance that we go into. Now, let me define the word trance, because for some people that sounds kind of scary. To me, trance simply means you got your eyes closed, you relax, and you're listening to me. For my verbiage, don't put anything else on that, okay? That's all it is to me. All of us have a level of trance. That as we go down into hypnosis, once we go below this level of trance, and then we come up, and we're emerged, and we go about our business, we will have no memory consciously of whatever was done or said in that area of trance. It's a natural hypnotic amnesia. Now, when you're in this level, you still have all of your faculty, you're sharp, you hear everything, you can say no, you can open your eyes, you can do it all. But after you emerge, this part of you stays blanked out. Now, what I always do with a client, and I recommend you do, is when you're emerging the person from hypnosis, you'll say, now, and I'll give you the handouts on this, I'm going to count from 1 to 3. At the count of 3, eyes open, fully alert, and you'll always remember everything we've said and done in our session. And so that eliminates this, and they'll remember everything. Now, when won't I do that? I won't do that, for example, if we are regressed to an abreaction that they had no conscious memory of going into it. I don't know if the conscious mind, even though the problem has been corrected, I don't know if the conscious mind is going to be able to handle it. So when I emerge the person in a situation like that, I'll simply say, now, at the count of 3, your eyes will open, fully alert, and your conscious mind will allow you to remember those things, you're able to handle. That's it. And reveal more and more to you, possibly as time goes by, as you're able to handle it. And then maybe they'll remember it, maybe they won't. Whatever. Doesn't matter to me at that point what they do. Post-hypnotic amnesia is giving a suggestion to a person that they will not remember something that went on when they emerge from hypnosis. That's what the dentist did, for example, remember with the seal. You're not going to remember the seal, it's in your best interest. It will not work unless that scenario is in effect. If you give a person a suggestion that they will not remember something, that may last for up to 72 hours, but then the memory is going to come back. And unfortunately, we've had some corrupt people in our business, like others have in their profession, who maybe in hypnosis have used these type of suggestions to maybe take advantage of an individual in their session, fondle a woman or something on that order. But it comes back, and they're going to pay the price for this. The exception to the rule, and as we know, all rules generally have exceptions, is if you are an awesome authority to that individual, and you give them that suggestion and then give them why it's in their best interest, that they will allow the amnesia to be there. So if a doctor tells a person that it's in your best interest because of, there's a very high probability you're going to accept the suggestion for amnesia. Whereas if I say it, there's a very low probability that you're going to accept the suggestion, you see. Arm levitation, well, we'll talk about that later. It's a technique in where you tell a person in hypnosis their arm is going to move and lift and rise. It can be an induction or a deepening technique without them moving or lifting it on purpose. And you'll see people, their arms will float over and it'll touch their nose and they'll drop down into trance. It's kind of fun. Auto-hypnosis, it just means self-hypnosis, teach a person how to hypnotize themselves. Catalepsy. Catalepsy is through suggestion creating a rigidity in a muscle group. Many of you have seen maybe stage hypnosis show where the arm is stiff and rigid as a steel bar. That's a catalepsy. But catalepsy is also the exact opposite of that. It's the complete relaxation of a muscle group. And in one of our inductions that we use, we teach you how to relax your eyelids to the point they won't work. And that's the beginning of the induction, and that's already a catalepsy of a small group of muscles. So either the complete rigidity or the complete flaccidity of a muscle group. Ah, my personal favorite. Where is it? You ready? This is called the Chevelle pendulum. Walk around with this in your hand, everybody thinks you're strange. This was a tool of our profession for many years. It was used to hypnotize people. We don't use it for that anymore. But there is a really good use for this particular device, which I'll show you tomorrow. That's going to make you a lot of money. So you'll find it. You should never be without a Chevelle pendulum, no matter where you go. And tomorrow you'll understand why. I just want to show you what it is today. And this is a professional one. You'll notice that this is made out of plastic and not crystal. Anybody know why?
Injury. When you lose it, it doesn't cost you money.
Perfect. When you lose it, it doesn't cost you much money. But you know, I love when I have a really lot of metaphysical people in the class. I'll try to keep a straight face, and I'll say, well, you know, the reason is if this was crystal, outside entities can begin to move this and have control over it. But really, because it's cheap, is what I like. And it's basic. Nowadays, people are using little different shape things. But I like the old ball. It has just a history of the work in it. Yeah. Highly expensive, very expensive pendulum. Okay. Detachment. Detachment is the way we are when we're in hypnosis. It means we're aware of our surroundings and everything that's going on around us. We just allow ourselves to be detached from it. It's just like off in the distance. We don't want to be bothered with the cars. We don't want to be bothered with the TV set or the dog barking. That's fine. Let it go on. We just detach and stay over in this nice place we're in. Fascination. Fascination is an old way we used to hypnotize people. And it simply works like this. And I'm not going to hypnotize you, but may I borrow your eyes a little bit? You would take a shiny object. We'll just use this because it's pretty shiny. And we would hold it above a person's eyes like this, right up. I used to like to see the tip of my finger would come just over the ball. And so the tip of my finger would rest on our forehead. Don't look up. Keep your head straight. Look up with your eyes only. So the tip of my finger would just separate it from the body by just a little bit. And now I would just start saying this to her. And now as you look at this shiny pendulum, you'll notice you begin to develop a feeling in your eyes. A feeling of heavy, droopy, oh so drowsy and sleepy. And you would talk like that. Now, when you're holding this up here, doesn't it start to hurt after a while to look up there?
Yeah.
Yeah. In other words, you're creating eye strain is what you're doing. So that finally when you say to a person, your eyes are getting heavy, droopy, drowsy, sleepy, you're saying, yeah, and they hurt like hell too. And you're saying, so finally, when you feel they're just so heavy, just let them close. You go, you bet. Oh, it feels so much better. It's just a way of getting eye closure is all it is. And we learned back when I was 15 years old that if you want a person to close your eyes, let's try a different way. Close your eyes. Thank you very much. See, isn't that easier? And you don't have to go ahead into that whole shtick, and it works just as well. So that's what we call fascination. Hypnotizing a person by concentrating on their on a shiny little object. Fixation. Now, fixation's another thing. Fixation was very popular on the East Coast for many, many years. And it's still very popular in many of the schools out there. And many inductions are built on the concept of fixation. So I'll just run through a couple of them, so if you ever hear them, I'm not going to teach them to you because they don't get you where you need to be fast. So let's just show you in case somebody asked you, says, oh, I use this induction, you'll know what it is. One of them is called the Dr. Flowers induction. You went to that bias of training, didn't you? Yeah. Okay, Dr. Flowers induction starts off like this. Get in a comfortable position, put your hands on your legs, and select a spot on the ceiling. Doesn't matter where it is, as long as it's slightly above eye level. And I want you to look at that spot in a vague and dreamy kind of way. Does this sound familiar to you? Now, in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 to 20. With each number I say, I want you to close and open your eyes. When you open your eyes, continue to look at that spot. With each number I say, notice that your eyes become sleepier and heavier and droopier. So that at some point before I reach the number 20, your eyes will become so heavy that it'll just be more effort than you care to open them. And don't, just leave them closed and let yourself relax. Do you understand? The person says yes. So then you begin. 1, blink, bonk. 2, 3. Now a lot of people are going to finally close their eyes and relax. But where are they? You don't have a clue. And in our work, we need to know exactly where people are because level of trance what we're able to do with a person depends on what level of trance they're in. Unfortunately, you get an engineer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 19, 20, nothing. 21, 22. Stop. All right, you're doing fine. This time I'm going to count again. This time I'm going to count from 1 to 25,000. Figure maybe you're going to bore this guy into Cleveland. This thing. So that's called the Dr. Flowers induction. There's another one that's based basically on the same induction. It's called the intermittent counting induction. And it's exactly the same induction, only in between numbers you say something. 1, now really let your eyes get heavy. 2, heavier, droopier, drowsier, sleepier. 3, deeper and deeper your eyes relax. 4, oh, go to sleep, will you, or I'll shoot you. Something like that, you see. And that's the intermittent counting one, you see. And you're going to hear those out there, and a lot of people are still doing these inductions. There's nothing wrong with these inductions. The problem is, again, if you're going to be a great hypnotist, you need to know where your people are. And these inductions, after you get them into trance, the only way you're going to find out at what level of trance they're in is by testing the individual, by using a hypnotic depth test. Well, a lot of people don't do that. Why? Because in the privacy of their office, they say, ooh, what if I use a test and I fail? They'll think I'm a bum as a hypnotist. I didn't say it. But I suspect there's some value in that because you need to know where your people are. So isn't it better to use an induction that testing is built into it and they don't even know they're being tested? And if they don't get there, you can quickly, by not testing them, get them there through another direction? Of course it is. So that's why we must move forward. These inductions were the ones I learned as a little boy when I was learning from Vic Carnella and those people. Not when I learned with the other ways. But these were the inductions that were state of art in the 40s and 50s. Come on. I mean, let's look at our whole world. Look at how everything has changed around us since the 40s or 50s. Well, our work has changed too. It's just that some people refuse to learn a new... See, that's the problem we've had in our profession. And the problem is for many years, hypnosis instructors, because we were so rare, became godlike gurus. Now, what happens when you're a godlike guru? It's tough being a godlike guru. And I'll tell you why it's tough. How do I go out and sit in a hypnosis class if I'm a godlike guru? So I have to fake that I know the new stuff rather than go out and learn it. So many of your really big hypnosis instructors over the years are still stuck in this old training, and those are the courses that are being taught today. And that's really terrible, and we need to move forward from that because the new knowledge is out there. And it's amazing how much we know compared to back then. Okay. Fractionization. Fractionization, I won't demonstrate it now. It will have a very valuable and honored place in this class. But it is probably the best method we have today of deepening hypnotic trance. It's a powerful, powerful deepening technique. So we'll just leave it at that for now. A hypnotic hallucination. Anybody here ever experienced a hallucination? Who grew up in the 60s? They used to have these little sugar cubes. My wife would never, I was married by that time. I was out at the ballpark. But hallucination hypnotically is not anything like that. A hallucination is just asking a person to create a picture of something in their mind. To have them picture something, they must hallucinate it. They must make this picture with their mind. That's called a hallucination. But there's different types. You have, I have not like the psychological hallucination where you're going bonkers or something. You have a negative hallucination, which is the inability to see something that is there. This is kind of fun in class. We'll do this sometimes, depending on the class. Some classes you can have more fun with than other ones. For example, and I got to start getting these names down. What's your first name? Sheila. Sheila's in class, and I'm up here with Ben. And I got Ben in deep hypnosis. And I say, Ben, Sheila has to leave early for lunch. She'll be back after lunch. So you'll hear the door close, and that'll be her. Don't let that disturb you. And let's all say goodbye. Okay, Sheila, we'll see you later. And we all go, goodbye. But Sheila doesn't go anyplace. She sits there. So I say to Ben, I said, okay, Ben, listen. In a moment, I'm going to have you open your eyes and go back to the chair. But do me a favor. Go sit in Sheila's chair because I want to move the room around a little bit, and so I don't want you in your chair. Okay, count of three, boom, he opens his eyes. Well, he looks at the chair. You're there, but he doesn't see you. Now, he walks over to the chair, turns around, sits on your lap. Well, we've all sat on somebody's lap, and we realize there's somebody under us. But he looks around, and there's nobody there. This gets very disconcerting. This is a very confusing thing to a person. That's why we don't do that with every class. That's a negative hallucination. Then there's a positive hallucination. The ability to see something that is not there. This takes a little bit deeper level of trance. For example, I may have Ben up here and I'll say, oh, who's your favorite movie star? Do you have one? No. All right. I'll say, Ben. I'll say, ladies and gentlemen, while Ben is in hypnosis here, I forgot to mention to you that we have a visitor coming into class this morning. And she's in town, and she's a friend of the family. And she said she stopped by the hypnosis class, and I told her you wouldn't mention that she was here. And she's just coming in now, so let's all turn around and kind of greet Hillary Clinton. Hi, Hillary, how are you? Well, everybody goes, hey, Hillary, how are you? Good to see you. And of course, nobody's there. Well, you know who Hillary Clinton is, don't you? The president? Anyway. Huh? Now we're date timing this thing. Anyway, I said, Ben, open your eye. When I tell you to open your eyes, and Hillary's back there, and introduce yourself. And he'd open his eyes and be amazed because he would hallucinate Hillary Clinton, you see. A lot of times that can be very fun to do. Again, depending on the class. Some classes, they really don't like this kind of stuff, you see.
How long it would last, that hallucination?
I don't know. We usually just say close your eyes after a few minutes and now open your eyes. I imagine it'd go away pretty quick, though. A hangover. Any of you ever had a hangover? Mm-hmm. You have? Mm-hmm. I'm shocked. A sweet, innocent-looking girl like you? Well, we're not talking about that kind of hangover. We're talking about the hypnotic hangover. Now, the hypnotic hangover simply is when a person is in really deep trance and you emerge them too quickly from hypnosis without giving them enough suggestions of vim and vigor. When they open their eyes, they're still in a semi-state of hypnosis. They're groggy, they got a headache, they feel hungover. Well, you don't want anybody leaving your office that way. So when that happens, you quickly re-hypnotize, and we'll show you how to do that, and re-emerge them from hypnosis with powerful suggestions of you're going to feel alert, refreshed, you're going to feel great, so that this time when you emerge them, they are completely emerged and they're not going to be hungover, as you're so familiar with. Just kidding. Heterohypnosis. Heterohypnosis means working with an operator. A hypnotist and a client is heterohypnosis versus self-hypnosis where you're hypnotizing yourself. That's all it means. Hypersuggestibility is extremely heightened suggestibility brought about by deep hypnotic trance. In other words, what is hypnosis? We're going to get into that, of course, a little bit later, but suffice to say at this point, the more we go into hypnosis, the more suggestible we become. Now, don't think that's a bad thing, because we need to talk about the difference between suggestibility and gullibility a little later on. But that, trust me, it's a good thing to be. Hypnoanalysis. In this class, the basic intermediate class, we teach you how to do direct suggestion hypnosis, how to hypnotize, put all the safeguards around it, do direct suggestion. In the advanced class that comes after this one that we'll be doing, we teach you how to do hypnoanalysis and hypnotherapy. Hypnoanalysis is locating the cause of an individual's problem. All of us, if we have a problem, there is a cause. Trust me on this one. There is a reason why you feel the way you feel. It may be mental, it may be physical, but I promise you there's a reason. Maybe you were born with it, maybe you weren't. So hypnoanalysis is locating the cause of that particular problem. Of course, then when you locate the cause, then you forget about that, you've got the information, then you do the hypnotherapy, which is the transformational portion, where you take that information and use it to correct the problem. Hypnoidal. A lot of people use this term, I don't. It's called a very light state of hypnosis. The entrance of hypnosis is called the hypnoidal state. Close your eyes, listen to me. That's hypnoidal. Hypnology. People keep inventing new words on me all the time. That's another word for just hypnosis. Don't worry about it. Hypnosis. Hey, there's a word that needs definition, doesn't it? What is hypnosis? What do you think hypnosis is? What does an engineer think hypnosis is?
Anything that is not conscious.
Anything that's not a conscious state.
Anything abnormal.
That's not normal, whatever normal means.
No, anything that is not consciously, it's not normal conscious.
Okay. What do you think it is?
Different, being a different state of awareness or
Okay.
ability to feel different things or comprehend different things.
Okay, that sounds real. What do you think it is?
State of suggestibility.
Heightened state of suggestibility? Okay. Anybody else want to throw one out here? You're a hypnotist. What do you think it is?
Altered state of awareness.
An altered state of awareness. Okay, and you're all right, because until recently, that hypno stuff has never had a formal definition. And so almost every instructor in the universe had a different definition, or each individual within themselves were able to generate a definition based on their perception of what it is. Well, that's fine, but the problem is we need one standardized definition if we are going to finally stabilize core curriculum and all these other things and stabilize definitions and mechanics in our profession. Now, there has been one definition of hypnosis which has been accepted by the United States government, Department of Human Services Division, in their educational programming section. And your good schools are now saying, look, let's use this definition. It's official. by the federal government. And it makes sense to me, too. And I like the definition because I think it's exactly what it is. It's a two-parter. The first part is, first, hypnosis is the bypass of the critical factor of the conscious mind. That's your judgmental, analytical part of your mind. The bypass of the critical factor. Second, the establishment of acceptable selective thinking. The giving of the individual thoughts, ideas, or hypnotherapeutical direction that's okay with them. The bypass of the critical factor and the establishment of acceptable selective thinking. Now that's the definition that is official. I want you to think about this definition. What word is missing from this definition that historically has always been associated with hypnosis? Suggestibility, yeah, but there's a bigger one. The bypass of the critical factor and the establishment of acceptable selective thinking. Close. Unconscious, trance. The big one is the word relaxation, isn't it? Through the newer techniques we know today, we can put people into very deep hypnosis with little or no relaxation whatsoever. As a matter of fact, some of your really good hypnotists out there today wish we would never have to use any relaxation techniques. Why? Time-consuming, boring. If you didn't have to have those techniques, you could double the amount of people you could see in a day. But why do we still use them? Well, for two reasons. Very few schools are teaching the non-relaxation techniques, number one. And number two, if we don't meet to a degree, at least an acceptable degree, the perception of what your client thinks hypnosis is, they won't think they're hypnotized. So if you say to somebody, look, Joe, you don't have to have any relaxation, let me just do some hypnosis, they're going to think you're a quack. So we'd love to get rid of the relaxation, but we can't, we're stuck with it. So my philosophy is just give them enough that they're satisfied with that feeling, and then move on and get to really deep hypnosis. And I like that concept. Okay. Ideomotor is an involuntary movement of a part of the body through suggestion. An arm lifting through suggestion is an ideomotor thing. An induction is simply the words we use to help a person go into that special state of mental and physical relaxation. It's a formalized ritual as an induction. That's all it is. You'll learn inductions are the least important part of your hypnosis session. Once you eliminate fear, once you have one thing else, which we'll talk about, hypnosis is a breeze. There's nothing to it at all. Lethargy is a state of hypnosis characterized by deep relaxation, a reluctance to talk, kind of a useless state for doing Firecracker 500 hypnosis, you see. But it's not a good thing. An obsession. Obsessions are things we work with, and it's a driving, irresistible idea combined with an emotion has a tendency to repeat itself endlessly. And we've all heard about these obsessions, or I'll assume we do, where people like have to wash their hands 300 times a day or something. They're just so obsessed with cleanliness and things on this order. That's one of the definitions we have that is similar to the psychological definition. Phobia, or if you're pronouncing it the way it's spelled, which is my personal belief, phobia. What is a phobia? Does anybody know? All right, that's right, you've got some training in this here. An irrational fear of.
Whatever. Doesn't matter.
Give me some examples.
Well, an irrational fear that the building is going to be on fire in the next few minutes.
Right.
And there's no rational reason to suspect
None.
the building will be on fire.
Or agoraphobia, or agoraphobia. That is
Right.
irrational fear of being outside in public, right? Now the psychologists, and if you're a psychologist, I don't mean this disparagingly, have a whole list of phobias that go from agoraphobia to xenophobia. And there's tons of them in between. People are afraid of small places. They're afraid of elevators. Like, I have mother-in-law phobia. Oh, you've met her. But does this make any sense? You see,
Depends on the mother-in-law.
there's only one phobia. From a hypnosis point of view, there's only one phobia. People aren't afraid of being outside. What are they afraid of? They're afraid of the fear they feel when they're outside. So phobia is nothing more than a fear of a fear. Now, once we realize we only have one phobia, how easy is it to work on? Find the fear, do a little the cause of the fear, do a little transformational work. It's gone. In later on in class, in the advanced portion, we're going to hand out a sheet of paper, 8 things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Put a person into hypnosis, do these 8 things really quick, have them open their eyes, and their phobia is gone. And you can duplicate it over and over and over and over again. So we don't have to deal with that old concept of all these different phobias. Stick with the idea there's only one, and you'll be tremendously successful with it. A pre-hypnotic suggestion is actually a waking hypnotic suggestion. It's a suggestion given to an individual prior to them going into hypnosis that they are going to do beautiful, they're going to be successful, things on this order. Pyramiding. It's a very powerful deepening technique, or it is a deepening technique. And induction itself is a deepening technique, isn't it? So pyramiding simply means changing the induction without telling the person you're changing the induction. If one induction isn't working, don't go, oh, rats, it's not working, I'm going to do another one. You just slide right into the other one and pyramid it on top of the one that you've just done. That's called pyramiding. All right. Psychosomatic. Psychosomatic simply means a physical illness caused by a mental problem. There are many psychosomatic illnesses out there, and we'll be going over a lot of them. And we'll just hold on for a second here while Bobby changes.